During much of the interwar period, the Imperial Japanese Navy had mostly concerned itself with building large and powerful destroyers, in many ways leading the charge towards the super destroyer, along with France. Then they tried to fit the same capability into the new restrictions of the London Naval Treaty, didn't work out that well, before dropping that idea entirely and going back to the size they wanted as they began to disregard those treaties. Some smaller, older ships were kept around and a couple of classes of much smaller torpedo boats were built, but by the end of the 1930s there was another shift. It was decided that large destroyers should be divided into three types: A, B, and C. The Type A was to be the General Fleet Destroyer, a balanced design represented most recently by the Yugamo class. Type B was to be primarily a carrier escort anti-aircraft destroyer, and this would be the Akizuki class. And finally, there would be a large destroyer primarily for offensive use with the fleet, and equipped with many, many torpedoes. The prototype for this vessel would be the Shimakaze. Appreciating that times had changed a bit since the first iteration of their fleet attack plans back in the 1920s, the new ship would have to be exceptionally fast to get into the enemy lines and able to deliver a massive torpedo spread. Then it would have to withdraw, ideally before the enemy cruisers got the measure of the ship's range. To accomplish this, the designers started with the baseline of the Yugamo design, but inserted an additional hull section amidships, which pushed the ship's length to comfortably over 400 feet, and the hull was also made a fraction wider and sat a fraction deeper in the water. As well as more machinery, which was also of a new and more energy-dense type, the main change in armament was an additional torpedo launcher, which was the main reason for the hull extension. This brought the ship's armament to 3 twin 5-inch 50 caliber dual-purpose guns, albeit that whilst the weapon's elevation was good, they had to return to a 10-degree angle to reload, which limited their rate of fire in the anti-aircraft role. Some additional anti-aircraft cover was questionably supplied by a pair of triple Type 96 25mm mounts and a pair of roughly 50 cal machine guns mounted in the front of the bridge. The main feature, though, was the 3 quintuple torpedo launchers carrying long lance torpedoes, all on the centre line, and thus giving the ship the single largest torpedo salvo of any destroyer at the time, at 15. Due to the weight of the 3 launchers, and the 24-inch torpedoes that they carried, it was not possible to provide any reloads, as had previously been standard on Japanese ships, although they did find space for 18 depth charges that were carried just in case any submarine showed up. All of this was fitted into a hull that displaced almost 2,600 tons standard, and was powered by a pair of turbines that delivered 75,000 shaft horsepower to the water via 2 screws. This was a power output that was only a fraction less than that of a Nagato-class battleship, on a vessel that was less than 1/15 of the displacement, so it's probably little surprise that the ship was designed to reach 39 knots and would actually prove capable of almost 41 knots on trials. Laid down in August 1941, launched in July 1942 and commissioned in May 1943, she entered service with a Type 22 general-purpose radar installed, but as she was big, expensive and complex in a time when the Imperial Japanese Navy was losing destroyers at quite the alarming rate, her planned successors would be cancelled in favour of smaller and cheaper designs, leaving the Shimakaze as a unique vessel. She also wouldn't get a chance to actually use her fearsome torpedo battery, as by the time she entered service the 2 main uses for Japanese destroyers were either evacuating troops or escorting larger ships to try and keep them alive in the face of American aircraft and submarines, neither of which were particularly vulnerable to a surface-launched torpedo. This she did for about a year before a refit added some more 25mm guns and a Type 13 air search radar, so she could at least see what her anti-aircraft suite was inevitably going to miss, coming from a longer distance. Her one chance for glory was when she sailed with the Centre Force at the Battle of Samar, but by the time the action was joined, she was acting as a giant lifeboat for a good chunk of the survivors from both the Musashi and the cruiser Maya, and thus she ended up stuck at the back and unable to do much of any particular interest beyond survival. Her end came on the 11th of November 1944 on the opening day of the Battle of Ormoc Bay, when she was found escorting a troop convoy along with a number of other destroyers. Task Force 38 was nearby, and 350 aircraft were launched. The Type 13 radar at least giving the crew enough time to update their Lost Will and Testament before a veritable cloud of Hellcats, Helldivers, and Avengers dropped out of the sky. Soon enough, the Shimakaze was disabled and drifting, whilst also on fire. 3 other destroyers and 4 of the troop transports had also been sunk, and Shimakaze exploded a few hours after the attack when the fire reached something particularly interesting. Her wreck would be rediscovered in December 2017 by the RV Petrel, with her 3 quintuple torpedo launchers making identification of what is otherwise a somewhat smashed up and mangled wreck relatively easy.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.